We will first review fundamental configurations for subscription billing with project management and accounting module, and then move into the product demos and finish with the review of the roadmap and Q&A. So let's start. Subscription billing feature is ability to recognize revenue on a periodic basis, and it's usually contractually agreed between various parties such as service provider and the customer. And there are multiple scenarios when this model is a common practice, and we are enabling these scenarios through our product. Features that you are seeing on the screen are available as part of the subscription billing module. And in this case, in our current tech talk, we are reviewing subscription billing with PMA, and you must enable subscription billing and billing schedules and deferrals with projects features. You can see them in the top and the bottom of the list here. In addition to this, billing schedules and deferrals only apply for projects with none or time and material project type, and projects funded by customer or grant. You also must enable deferred cost and non-revenue in a project group, and optionally you can specify contract billing rules for chargeable categories. In addition to that, you can see that this is how the project group will look with deferrals enabled, and you can find it under the product management and accounting, setup, posting, and project groups. You should also define default accounts for deferrals, and you can see that they are split based on transaction type, such as sales order, project expenses, timesheets, etc. And this is specified under the subscription billing, revenue and expense deferrals, setup, and deferral defaults. And as I mentioned, in addition to that, you also have the project ledger posting accounts. And these are defined for all the PMA scenarios, but must be specified in our case too. And they are under the project management and accounting, setup, posting, and ledger posting setup. And optionally, you can select chargeable categories under the project management and accounting, project contracts, billing rules, and chargeable categories. And these details, Brian gonna go through in the demos, once we have all of the configuration enabled, we'll be able to see project billing and schedules in all projects page, and not only see, but use them as well. Now, instead of going through the details and specifying the high level, let's dive into the demos. And our first demonstration is regarding the project invoicing using subscription billing. And for our first scenario, we will see how subscription billing would work for 1 year support project phase with a fixed fee when we invoice the customer in advance and bill every quarter. And on the screen, you also can see step-by-step scenarios of what we are going to run through in the demo.
In this first example, we'll take a look at a project where we're going to have a sub-project for our support to be billed on a quarterly basis. We're going to bill that up front. So we're going to use this particular implementation project here. If we look at this particular project, we're going to see that we have a phase 3 support sub-project that has been created for this particular project. This particular project is in a released state, and we're going to create our billing schedule for the support portion of that. So we can do this on the Manage tab of the project by going to the New section and clicking on Subscription Billing, Billing Schedule. Now, some of our information will default from our recurring contract billing setup and configuration. In our case, we're billing quarterly, so we want to make sure we pick quarterly here for our billing schedule group. And then our customer information will come from our project that we have here. And we're going to start this on 8/1, and it's going to go for a year, so that'll be 4 quarters. We'll click OK, and this is going to create our billing schedule. So now we have our billing schedule header, and we have our lines that we can enter. So we have a line that we need to enter for our support item. So we'll do that. And in this case, now we'll see we have our support, and then we have here a price of $100 per quarter. So when we look at our view billing detail here, we'll see 4 quarters of billing. So starting on August 1st, running through through July 31st of 2024 for $100 per quarter. Now that we have this created, we're going to go ahead and invoice this particular support plan. So we'll do that by going to the invoice section and generate invoice. And then here, we're going to change our date here. We're going to go based on from date of 8/1. So we'll bill in advance. I already use the option to post invoice automatically. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a sales order that is linked to the project for the support item that we had here. Then it's going to create a project invoice proposal, including that sales order, and then invoice that. So we'll go ahead and click on View Billing Schedules. And here we're going to see our one line that's going to be our section or quarter from 8/1 to 10/31 for $100. I'll click Generate All, and this is going to trigger that processing of the sales order, the invoice proposal, and the invoicing of that invoice proposal. Now our invoice proposal has been posted. Here from the billing schedule, we can go to the View Billing Detail, and in this form, we'll be able to see some of that information if we want to drill back to it. So we'll see we have the sales order here. So sales order 226, it was invoice 286, and we can go back to the project invoice proposal if we wanted to do that by clicking on the hyperlink here. If we look at that project invoice proposal, here we can see our sales order line for support. That's covering 8/1 to 8/31, and the detailed one quantity at $100. We'd also be able to go to the actual project itself. We can take a look at that project and then view the detail as far as the information as far as posted project transactions, get back to the postings and everything. So our project is linked up here. If I click on our project here, it should take us to our sub-project. If we look at our posted project transactions here from our project, we'll see our invoice that we did as of today. So picking up, starting on 8/1 for $100, we'll see that it's fully invoiced. And then we can go and look at the voucher from this particular form as well. So here we see our voucher. We hit our accounts receivable account for $100. Then we had our revenue from the products. So the support in this case for $100. That's a little bit of an example of how we can use a billing schedule along with a project.
For our second case, we're going to look at the project deferrals and revenue allocation. And in this case, we have installment hours invoice to the customer and revenue on cost and cost deferred. And you can also see step-by-step of creation of the hours journal, deferred revenue, and the cost. So let's have a look at that as well.
In our next demonstration, we'll take a look at revenue and expense deferrals integrated with project management and accounting. We're going to start by taking a look at a couple of the options that are added when these features are enabled together. We'll start by looking at a project group. So one of the changes that we've made is in the project group, we've added options on the post-cost side for deferrals. So to have a deferred type for ledger. So you'll see that in the post-cost hour, post-cost expense, and post-cost item side. So this is handling our cost. Then on the revenue side, we added options for deferred revenue hour, deferred revenue expense, deferred revenue item, and deferred revenue fee. So this is the project group that we'll use for our scenario today. Additionally, when we're working in our scenario, we do have an optional setup, which would be the project contract billing rule. So not required. If you do have one set up, we'll look at the billing rule. If you do not have a billing rule set up, we would look at the setup of the line property for that particular line. If it's chargeable, then we'll create a deferral. If not, we will not. So we're going to enter some hours against phase 1 of our implementation project, which was our prototype step. Before we get into that, we'll take a look at that billing rule. So in the project contract ID of that particular project, you could have a billing rule. And if you do, in the detail, what you would need to do is in the project section, you would need to have your project, so in our case, the prototype, inserted over into the selected projects. And then on the chargeable categories, any of the categories that you're going to record against that you want the deferral created for would need to be in the selected categories, like we've just done here. As I mentioned, if you don't have this set up, then we'll look at the line property for the particular transaction. So this particular billing rule setup is not required. In our case, we're not going to use it. So we'll take this particular billing rule out of our project. So I'm just going to leave that empty for the sake of our demonstration. Let's enter our project hours for this particular transaction. So we'll go to the hours journal for our prototype. We're going to go ahead and create a new hours journal. We'll go to lines. I'm going to create a new line. We'll see here we have our category and our resource filled in. Now I'm going to fill in 7 hours. If I hit save here, we'll see that the deferred checkbox will be marked by default. I can go and take a look at the deferral that's going to be created by going to Functions and then Deferrals. And we'll have the deferred transactions form up here. So we'll see the accounts that will be used based on the setup in revenue and expense deferrals. And we'll see the deferral information that we use. So in this case, it's going to be straight line, equal amounts per period, created from a template, which is fiscal 12, and it's going to start on 8/7, and it will end up on 7/31/2024. We can preview that deferral schedule by clicking on the preview button. This will show us on the revenue side and expense side what values we'll get for each of those periods. If we need to, we can make any tweaks, or later on, we can make an adjustment to the schedule as well. This all looks good, so we'll hit OK. And now we're going to post our hours journal. Now our hours journal has been posted. We can look at our project transactions for that particular prototype sub-project. So I'm going to go to Post Transactions here, and we're going to take a look at the transaction that we just posted, which is going to be this bottom one here. And if we look at the View Transaction button, here we'll see that we have a deferral schedules button, but it's not enabled at this time. It will be enabled shortly after we invoice this. We'll see that we have 7 hours with a cost price of $200 and a sales price of $350. On the Cost tab, we can see that this is a deferred ledger status, and we can see we have 0 for deferred costs right now. On the Sales tab, we can see we have nothing for deferred revenue at this point in time, and then this transaction status is at posted. So to move forward, we need to invoice our particular project transaction. So we'll go ahead and create an invoice proposal here. I'm going to pull in our hours journal. So here it is. And we'll create and post our invoice proposal. Now our invoice proposal is completed. We can take a look at our transactions again. So we'll go to our posted transactions here for our prototype. We'll pick our transaction from before, and we can click on View Transaction, and you'll see that now in the header, our deferral schedules button is enabled. And you'll see that we have 2 deferral schedules, one for the credit side, which is our revenue side, that's for $2,450, and one for the cost side, which is our debit recognition type, and that's for $1,400. We'll come back to these in a moment. We'll take a look at how we can recognize revenue and cost based on those. But one of the things I want to take a look at here as well is if we take a look at that transaction, we can take a look at the sales and the cost tabs, and we can see we have deferred costs of $1,400 now. And we'll also see a link to the deferral schedule on that particular line. So this one is 24. On the sales tab, you'll see as well, we have a deferral schedule, and you'll see that we have a deferred amount of $2,450. You can also take a look at the voucher. So originally, we had a voucher that was posted before we went and invoiced for the cost side. So that was for salaries, wages, expense, and our deferred COGS. Now we have a deferred revenue posting and an accounts receivable posting. If we go to the deferral schedules, we can recognize a period either through going to the periodic menu, or you can recognize it by going to the form here, clicking recognize. So we'll recognize our revenue for our first month here. So the month of August. Now that's been done, we can take a look at that journal badge from the deferral schedule. We can take a look at the lines, and we can go to the voucher here, see what our posting looks like. So in our case, we had deferred revenue, and then our revenue labor accounts were impacted here. One other thing to call out would be, we do have options in the schedule itself. For instance, if the account or the information was wrong, you can go to modify schedule, and then you can adjust some of those settings. So in case maybe you didn't want to have equal amounts per period, or you wanted to change from being a template to not being a template, or you wanted to adjust the end date, then you can make an adjustment to that schedule, and that can post a journal to clean up or catch up based on where you're at. So that's an example of posting the deferral with a project transaction. And let's say the revenue and the cost deferral created, posted, and the journal entries associated with.
And for our last demo, and although today we just posted and in the previous demo reviewed our transaction, there are additional project deferral transactions we could use. And Brian's going to review them very quickly as well.
For our last demonstration, just want to cover a few of the different options that we have for transactions with project management and accounting and deferrals. So we're going to start by looking at some of the setup in the revenue and expense deferrals. And what we're going to take a look at is the deferral default. In this bar, you're going to see the different transaction types that we have the ability to have a deferral on. The ones in particular that I want to focus on, we already looked at a project hour earlier in our second demonstration. For this one, we'll take a look at where to find these options for project fee, project expense, item requirements, expense report, and timesheets. Each of these will have its own configuration in terms of the deferred revenue account, deferred cost accounts, and the templates as an example. So we go back to our project that we're using for our demonstration. So we'll use the project for the prototype. We'll go ahead and grab that particular project, and we'll go through each of these examples. So with our prototype, here we can go to the project tab, and we'll just take a look at an expense journal. So I have one here that I've created. If I go to the lines, here we'll be able to see I have category specified, the quantity and amount. We'll see here that it's marked as deferred. And if I wanted to take a look at the deferral, I can take a look at it through the deferrals button up here at the top pane and form. But once again, this looks familiar to what we saw before with the hours journal. Just same deferrals form, just a different way to get to that particular form. As we saw, we can do this with a fee journal as well. So for a fee journal, on the lines, you'll have the deferral option again. And if it's all set up in that deferral defaults, it will default as deferred. If you want to make any adjustments, you can go to the functions button and you'll find deferrals there. So once again, that same deferrals form. We go back to our project, and in this case, if I go to the plan tab, if we go to the item requirements, here we can see that I have an item requirement for the support item. And we have our deferred option, and we can see that option if we go to the manage tab, if we go to functions, and then deferrals. So here, this one didn't default as yes, but I can turn it on. All my information came in, I can hit OK. Now we'll see that that's deferred as well. The next transaction that we want to take a look at is a timesheet. So we'll take a look at the timesheet here under project management and accounting. So I'll pull up a timesheet, and I've already created one here to save us the time of the workflow. So here I enter the timesheet, and you'll see that we have a deferrals option. So you'll have the project ID, the category, and the deferred option show up here. I entered 8 hours on today's date. And then the deferrals button will control and show the deferrals information. And then the next transaction type we have is expense report. I've also gone ahead and created one of those and have that through workflow here. So here I have a expense report for a conference for $100. And then for this particular transaction, we'll need to go to the distributions. And once you click view distributions, you'll see the deferrals option in the distributions. So those are the additional transactions outside of the standard sales order, billing schedule transactions that we've always had that allow deferrals and projects to work together.
Thank you for the demos, Brian. And let's check the roadmap.
Thanks, Milda. So we'll take a look at the roadmap here, and I'll call it a couple of different things here on the futures section here. And some of these will tie out to some of the questions that were asked so that we saw in the list of questions here. So some of the things that we're focused on here for the future are making some changes around MIRA. So that's the multiple element revenue allocation feature within subscription billing, and having some changes there around credit notes. So similar to what we had in revenue recognition around like reallocation. So being able to handle those credit notes and maybe making sure that we have the right revenue allocated to each of those particular periods. And then another thing that we've been working on is deferrals for stock service items. So in the legacy RevRec module that we had, if you had a stock service item, in that case, we would create a cost deferral when you posted an invoice for that particular transaction. With the revenue expense deferrals, we weren't creating that stocked service item cost deferral. So now we're creating that cost deferral. So that's a feature that we've actually completed. It just may not be in a release that's available to customers as of yet. So it'll be something that's coming really soon. And then one of the other large features that we're working on is inventory adjustments from closing and recalculation, and bringing those adjustments to the cost deferral. So for instance, depending on your inventory costing method, for instance, at the time that you invoice, you might have a cost that's assessed to that particular transaction for a cost of goods sold. This would be taking into account the adjustments that happen from inventory close and recalculation, and bringing those over to that cost of goods sold deferral. So that cost deferral that we create. This particular piece is going to be instrumental in some of the questions that were asked here that we'll get to in a moment, specifically around supporting stocked items, as well as what are the options as far as for integration with sales order and how those things in particular work. So that's a particular feature that we're working on to address those particular concerns. Additionally, we have some resources and recommendations. So here you'll see some of the information on some of the prior tech talks. So you also have, for instance, here, so we had the original tech talk, which was the subscription billing overview. Project deferrals was the second. And then we did, not project deferrals, that's the link to the help there for the project deferrals feature here. Then a third link here is subscription billing. So that was the second tech talk. And then we have a document on the revenue recognition migration to subscription billing. So that's a link to our help document. And that will be the content that we'll talk through in our next tech talk on September 7th. And then there's a link to the list of product ideas that are out on our ideas page. And then a link to our Yammer group. So we have a private Yammer group for the subscription billing feature. So that gives you access to the conversations and some artifacts in there as well. And also in the questions, there was a question about tech talks and the recordings for the original 3 that we've done so far. I pasted links into the chat there as far as the answer for that particular question. It has direct links to each of the 3 tech talks that were done previously.
Thank you, Brian. And last but not least resource for all of us is the Fast Track magazine. This is something that we release every month now, and you can find all the latest information about upcoming tech talks and new blog posts and documentation there. So without further ado, let's dive into the Q&A.
All right. I think what I'll do is I'll look at the questions here. I've been posting them into the published list here as they come in. I'll try to address the ones that have the most votes first, and then we'll kind of go from there. So just kind of going back to the oldest ones and looking for ones that have multiple votes here. So there was a question from Rob. For consumption-based billing schedules, is there any plan to link the consumption to the time charged to the project? So that one, it's not anything that we have planned right now, but one of the things that I'd call out is if you look at the kind of the demos that we did there for that third scenario, or the third set for the additional transactions that have the ability for deferrals, we do have the timesheet. So you can do either the timesheet on the project side, or you could use the hours journal on the project side. Both of those would potentially work there as far as getting that information in. As an alternative, this is something that we could log as an idea and then track that going forward as well. One from Anonymous, this one was, how does the billing schedule work when using CRM? So this one's maybe a little less topical to the topic that we have today as far as projects and subscription billing and deferrals. But right now what we do is we have the billing schedule is kind of a standalone entity. So it does have options. There are things that we want to do in the future as far as bringing this into like dual write and some of those scenarios. But right now, what we have is entities that can create the billing schedule. So for instance, regardless of where your CRM system might be, whether it's CE from us or whether it's, pick your CRM favorite out there, you could use those entities potentially to bring those particular billing schedules over. So there's options there as far as entities are concerned. Another question that had multiple likes here is one from Julia. Which version is this available in? So right now this is in a public preview, so you'll be able to see it in a public preview in any of the versions that are in the market. Some of the things might not be in all those versions. So for instance, if you look at like the timesheet integration, expense report integration, some of those are more recent adds to the feature. We're targeting 10.0.37 to make it GA. So that's the plan as of right now. So we have some bugs that we need to fix up here before early next week to make the cutoff. But assuming that we get those in, that would be the plan. So 10.0.37 for GA. Will deferral be available on the sales orders connected to projects? So yes, but with a caveat. So as I mentioned when I was talking through the roadmap feature, stocked items would have that limitation right now. So once we get that cost deferral adjustment from the inventory close and recalculations in place, then you'd be able to use stock items in this case. So for instance, right now, it'd be something that's non-stocked would be available, but for stocked items, once you have that project connected to that sales order, then you're going to get a message that you can't use that particular product. Are there project subledger to general ledger reconciliation reports or inquiries available for both cost and revenue deferrals? So project subledger wise, likely not, but we do have the inquiries and reports that we have on the revenue and expense deferral side. So there's an audit trail. There's a few other ones in there as well. But as you look through the list, you might find some of those might be helpful there. So that might be like the deferral balance or the recognition audit report. And then maybe some of the other things that we could do there. We do have the project statement integration piece too. And then as you saw in some of the demos, we do have the link backs there. So when you're looking at a deferral transaction, as far as on the project side, you can get to that deferral schedule from that project transaction as well. Can we create a billing schedule using fixed price projects? The answer there is no. It needs to be a time and material project. So that's a good question as well. So good clarification. So that one was kind of hidden in the questions, but that's in the chat. So the Q&A under that other one there. How does the generation of invoice data in this scenario tie back to project operations with non-stock scenario with dual write? So another good clarification here is around what we do support for project deployments right now. So we support the typical PMA finance and operations deployment method. So as far as like project ops, light deployment, those types of things, those will be things that would come in the future. So not there currently. So we're talking finance and operations integrated at this point here. Is it possible to have multiple billings lines for one header? Example, support D365, support ISV. Yes, you can have multiple billing lines on there. So no limitation as far as the number of billing lines. So for instance, you might have some that maybe span the first year of a particular project, some that span later years of a project. You could have a one-time thing, just like we talked about just a moment ago too. Any example for things like membership fees? So here, this once again wouldn't necessarily require the project integration. So for instance, if you just wanted to manage this through a billing schedule, you could do that as well. If you wanted to track it as far as costs and get a little more insight into it, you could definitely track it with a project as well. So you could use both of those pieces there and then track that way. So for instance, if it's a membership fee, whether it's annual, if it's monthly, depending on what it is, you could have your billing schedule set with that frequency, with the amount of what that billing should be, and then you can either bill it in advance or in arrears, depending on what you want to do. And then you could also take it further if you had deferral scenarios along with it as well. Is there a way to use the same order for each billing schedule line instead of creating multiple sales orders? No, not at the moment. So each time you run the generate invoice process, it will create a new sales order, or if you're not linked to a project, a new free text invoice if you have that option selected. So it'll create new released, if you will, sales orders or free text invoices. Will there be an option to use unbilled revenue with project-related sales order? If it will, when? Yes, this is available in there now as far as our released versions. You should see this. If you're not seeing it, reach out to me and let me know. But I know we worked through some examples and scenarios of it just recently, so I know it's working at least in 10.0.37, but it should be there at least 36 and 37. Can we set up schedules that are longer than 12 months? We have contracts that last 20 years where we bill in arrears and others that we bill up front. Yes. So you have a start date and an end date that will be on that billing schedule line. And then you have the frequency and then the number of units of that frequency, if you will. So if it's 1 month or whatever it is. So yeah, you can run these out into the future. It'll just build out the billing detail for the 20-year period. So whether they're annual or whatever the cadence that you have there is, you'll be able to do that. Okay, so another question, whether deferral can be set up for existing projects which was completed 50%, will system able to calculate for remaining transactions posted after the setup? So if the project transaction hasn't taken place or hasn't been posted yet, um, those transactions that get posted with that detail on there, we'll take that into account. So for instance, if I have a new hours journal, a new fee journal, if I have a new expense, those types of things, anything that's posted after you have that's configured and set up, yes, those would get posted with that detail. Anything that's posted beforehand would not, but we do have the ability to specify this or, change some of these options when you do an adjust transactions. So depending on, I guess I don't know if I necessarily looked at it to make sure that something posted before it was on versus after it was on, we can adjust and make sure that that works. But definitely something once it's been on, that's been posted, you can adjust after it's been posted. Will the planned deprecation of the existing revenue recognition functionality for October still happen if GA is planned for 37? That's a great question. So this is something that we'll actually talk about as well in the next Tech Talk as well. So right now, originally we had planned for that deprecation to happen at 10.0.36, which would have been the October release. Right now we're looking at probably moving that out to 10.0.38 for a couple of reasons. One being this integration not being GA at this point, so at the time that we wanted to deprecate. And then also a couple other reasons. So one of the things that we did with that revenue recognition feature is we've separated the product bundle. So we've pulled that out as a standalone feature. That will GA in 36. Having that deprecate and release in 36 just didn't seem like a good way to handle things. So we're looking at 38, partially because that also gets us into the new year. So 38 would be a GA of January. So that gets people past the year end as well. So good question. Remains to be seen if we'll stick with 38, just because we need to make sure that we keep seeing people move off of that particular product. But we'll keep monitoring. But as the plan is today, it's looking like 38 would be when we take that out of the UI. For subscription billing, I understand we have to set up services as items. Is there a way to not have site and warehouse required when setting up the billing schedules, or default the values for site and warehouse? Yes. So in the setup for the inventory model group or dimension group, sorry, you can choose to not. The dimension group, you can choose not to have warehouse. However, I think site is one that you can't necessarily get away from. That being said, once you have this configured, if you want to default the site or warehouse setting, depending on what you have on, there are some defaults on the item itself. So if you go to the release product, you can set up those defaults. I can put if you come back to this chat later, I'll put the exact path in there to make sure I get it right, but it should be under the release product. And then once you go to that release product, there's an option on there. Should be called, bear with me, I'll find it here real quick.
I think it's default.
It should be like,
settings.
Yeah, correct. Yep. So on the manage inventory tab under order settings, it's default order settings. And then you'll have options there for purchase, inventory, and sales. And we'll look at the sales order ones. So that's the one that you want to make sure that you set up. So then those will default on a billing schedule. To confirm when activating this feature, we could invoice from a project sales order, regular goods, and post the revenue to a deferred revenue posting type, and then use functionalities to track and eventually recognize the revenue. Yes. So when you do a sales order that it comes from a project, you would be able to, if it's a non-stocked item. So keep in mind that we talked about this earlier, that stock items will be something that will come in the future. But that would post that revenue to the deferred revenue account at the time that you do the invoicing of that particular project transaction, so that project sales order. So when you include that on a invoice proposal and invoice it, it'll go to deferred revenue, and that will be the setup that you have on the subscription billing side. So in the revenue expense deferrals module, there's deferral defaults. It'll look at that account that you have set up there. And then when you go and recognize that revenue from the deferral schedule, it'll remove it from deferred revenue and then use the posting type there for the product revenue. Will fixed fee projects be supported with billing schedules in the future? We see fixed offerings with a trend of wanting to bill in increments like a subscription. Possibly on the billing schedule side, maybe not on the deferral side. So we might have duplicate functionality on the project side for project revenue recognition that could handle some of that. So that might be where maybe that's a restriction that we might not go after and have both do this. But something that we could potentially look at in the roadmap. So another good idea suggestion here. Can the billing schedule trigger a purchase order back to back? So maybe a clarification here on the billing schedule. The billing schedule itself is either going to create a sales order or a free text invoice. It's not going to create a purchase order. Now, that's not to say that you can't take that sales order that's created and create a purchase order off of that particular sales order to go generate that inventory that you need for it. But this billing schedule itself is not going to create a purchase order itself. If you have a purchase order or a requisition number, you can add those to the header, but it's not going to create any of those documents from that particular billing schedule. Is it possible in the same SO to have a line with deferral and another one without just selecting different Incoterms for each? Yes, you don't have to have everything deferred or everything not deferred. Each line has the option to be deferred or not deferred. So you can have a mix there as far as deferred lines and not deferred lines. Like if we look at that example that I gave earlier with the hardware item and then the service and the insurance, maybe the hardware item is the only thing that's deferred, right? So we can have that scenario where we have that mix. Does subscription billing support non-stock deployment scenario? So this would be the scenario that we support right now. So that non-stock resource-based deployment in project. So think traditional PMA. That's what we'd support. For a monthly subscription billing, can we not use the on-account form with per month line with subscription amount? So you could use that if you're using a fixed price project, but if you're using a time and material, then that wouldn't be something that would be available as an option. And then if you're using a fixed price project, you'll lose out on some of these integrations here because they're only integrations that we have for time and material.
Brian, I also see one question from Mashwani. For time and material projects, what is case if we use the fee journal as subscription instead of item?
Oh, for the fee journal? So that's where, for instance, I think there was a question about using the on account earlier, like on a fixed price scenario. So you could use that fee journal. So if you had a fee that you wanted to record the revenue, because fee is going to be an interesting one because it doesn't have the cost side. So the fee is only going to have the revenue deferral, but you can definitely use that and defer it. It's not anything that's going to integrate with the billing schedule per se in that case, because it's not a sales order or a project sales order of that manner. But that journal that you use, you can have the deferral on that particular deferral. So for instance, maybe you had a $12,000 fee journal and you want to recognize $1,000 per month, you can do that using that fee journal with the deferral.
And I think there is one more question from Anonymous.
Yeah.
Can you add tax codes to the billing schedule?
Yep, the billing schedule line has the tax information, so that would come over with that particular piece. So what you'll see is we won't calculate the tax on a billing schedule, and that's because we'll rely on the sales order or the free text invoice in that matter to do that calculation. So based on what's configured and set up there, you'll see that flow over and default based on what's on there. So whether it's an item or if it's an account, depending on the options that you pick, you'll see that come over with that information.